Hi guys, so today's video is going to be my July reading wrap-up. I'm going to start with DNFs, go into the books that I completed, and then go into the books that I have not yet completed, but hopefully can carry into August. Jumping right into it with the DNF, I am so sorry. I know so many of you were looking forward to me continuing this series, but I ultimately decided to DNF the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne. I read Malice and I felt kind of right in the middle where there were certain aspects of the story that I greatly enjoyed, and then I had heard from so many of you and a lot of my friends that the series just continues to get better and better with each book, but there was the occasional person that was saying, I really don't think you're gonna like the continuations at all based off of what you're saying about the first one, and I think that that was true. Pretty quickly into Valor, I was starting to feel very frustrated based off of some of the things happening early on. It made me frustrated at things retroactively with Malice, but either way, still obviously, if Malice sounds good to you, check it out. And if you don't know what Malice is about, it follows what seems like a very basic fantasy. There's going to be an ultimate evil chosen one and then the ultimate good guy chosen one. There's these prophecies that are sort of telling you these things are going to come about, but you don't really know who those chosen ones are exactly. If you like a large cast of characters, that's a plus. You also get a lot of action, which is also a plus if you're a fan of that. I'll have the link to my review, but I'll also link a few other reviews so that you can check out a bunch of different ones because they are pretty chunky books. So if you're a little hesitant about it, obviously, of course, you're gonna probably want to know if it's something you want to dive into, with it being 4 books and all of them quite large. Fortunately, that was my only DNF, so there was just that one. So the rest of these completed. A lot of them I greatly enjoyed, which is very true of books 2 and 3 of the Winnowing Flame trilogy. Originally, I was planning on only reading book 2, which would be The Bitter Twins, but because I ended up putting down Valor, that gave me time to read The Poison Song, and I absolutely loved these. I thought it was a fantastic ending to this trilogy. I have sung this series' praises so many times at this point that I'm sure so many of you are tired of me talking about it. If you're new to my channel and you have not yet heard me talk about it, I'm so sorry because I don't want to bore everybody else that has heard me talk about it a lot. So I'm going to have my trilogy non-spoiler review linked in the description bar if you'd like to see more in-depth thoughts, but I highly recommend this trilogy. So many things that I think make it incredibly unique, and I love the characters. They're definitely very flawed and they bicker all the time, but there's this sense of found family and camaraderie. I ate it up. There's also some kind of animal companion mythological creature aspects to the story. By the way, those are adult fantasy in case you were unsure. But now switching to a YA book, and specifically a YA sci-fi book. It's the sequel to Warcross, and that would be Wildcard by Marie Lu. The first book follows a girl who sort of gets herself caught up in this world competition virtual reality video game, and then because she is so incredibly skilled at hacking, she ends up sort of being hired to find another hacker. And the first book I thought was quite fun. It was very easy to get into, and I just thought it was a good time, but there's kind of a little bit of a twist at some point in the story, and I was very intrigued by that twist. And then I was very eager to pick up this one. And I honestly was not disappointed. I really, really enjoyed this sequel, and I really was impressed with the way that Marie Lu was able to make me care about the things transpiring in this one, because we do the plot sort of starts to follow some other things and it becomes far more thematic, and I really liked the themes that are explored because of the fact that this is a sequel. I don't want to go too in depth, but it does definitely tap into what is it to be a human and loss, and would it be better if we could preserve people for as long as possible, or is having loss part of what makes life valuable? All those sorts of very heavy themes were explored in this. Switching back into the adult books, and we have a fantasy, which would be the Ikessar Falcon, which is another sequel. So I was kind of cranking through a lot of series, and this is the second book after The Wolf of Oren-Yaru. The first book follows the main character. It's first-person narration, and she is the leader of this particular area, and she has the opportunity to find her husband and try to bring him back home. They have a young son together, which I think definitely makes this point of view very unique. We don't get a lot of mother perspectives in fantasy, and to have it entirely from her point of view, I really, really enjoyed. And the whole aspect of her trying to bring her husband back to their kingdom is very intriguing because you don't know why they were separated. You don't really know if she drove him away, if he left because he was trying to protect her, or he didn't want anything to do with her, or if there was something political going on. So we kind of start the story with her trying to go to him, and you don't know what's going on. You're gonna kind of find out, but then lots of things go wrong. But as a result, if you're somebody who is very plot driven, this might feel a little aimless for a while, might feel a little meandering. And I will say our main character is not necessarily the most likable. She definitely has an inflated view of herself, and she thinks that she is not somebody who's been pampered and somebody who gets everything they want, but she definitely gets a lot of what she wants. And so it's very interesting to see her kind of thinking like, well, I didn't get everything I wanted when I was younger. I'm really strong. And then she'll mouth off to people and then she'll get beat up and you're like, girl, you need to calm down. You are not all that. And you see a lot of potential for character growth. This second book, I feel it was definitely just sort of continuing the story of the first one. And so I don't know if I have a whole lot of different feelings toward this one than I did the first one. There's a couple of aspects of the main character and how she feels about other people that can sometimes be very frustrating. And certain people she writes off, certain people she gets really angry with, and then other people that I think she should be angry with, she doesn't necessarily get as angry with as I think she should, or certain instances where she will sort of forgive somebody or let something go, and it's so frustrating because you're like, why? Just kill them! But you know that she can't because politically that wouldn't look very good, and you're like, but I want you to. So I think it ends up showing the difficulties of trying to navigate politics and her role. She can't just do whatever she wants, even though you would think she could because supposedly she's the ruler of this land. But either way, I enjoyed the second one. I wouldn't say I enjoyed it significantly more than the first. I enjoyed it about the same, and I'm very eager to see what happens in the third one. Next up we have The Wolf. This was the Shelf Space book club pick. Shelf Space is a book club that my friend Jessie from the channel Jessie May started, and this particular month she had a guest host, which would be Leanna from Leanna's Library. I will have their channels linked, and this was Leanna's pick. It's one of her favorite books. She's read it 5 times, I think, at this point, and I felt so bad because Leanna is my friend and Jessie's my friend, and they both like this book, and I didn't care for it. It had everything that, it had all the makings of a favorite for me, and just didn't quite dive into the things I wanted it to dive into as much. It's very much a military fantasy. There is a lot of fighting. It's not particularly fantastical other than the fact that it's sort of a different world, and there's sort of different cultures and things like that, but there really is no magic. There's not really mythological creatures. There's just sort of different human people, basically, like some people that are much taller, that sort of thing, and they are constantly at war. We have the Southerners, which are led by a man named Bellamus, and then you have Roper, who leads the Northerners. There were a few things that didn't quite click for me. For one, I found Roper, his plotline just always seemed to work itself out too easily, so I never really felt like there was much threat, because whenever something would happen that was negative, it just seemed like something would save the day. And it was frustrating because at the very beginning of the story, he is thrust into this role and he is not necessarily ready for it. He's not really ready to lead his people, and it's just like he kind of immediately figures out the absolute best strategies. He comes home, and even when he makes a mistake, he's able to come up with a solution very easily, it seems. And I it sounds strange, but I wanted him to fail more often, so that way it actually felt like there were more stakes. I also didn't particularly feel like there was a huge amount of distinction between the side characters. So the side characters often were defined by their battle prowess, except for that everybody's battle prowess was at level 100. Everybody was basically the best. And I was actually messaging a friend of mine that didn't care for this book, and I was telling her jokingly, oh my gosh, everybody is introduced as being the best soldier there ever was, essentially. And then a little later, there was a character, and it literally said, while all these other characters that you've already met, even though everybody thinks they're the most fearsome warriors, this character, for those that know him, they know that he's actually the best. And I was like, they literally are all the best. I tabbed it. I was like, everybody is the best, apparently. Aside from a few instances of head hopping, I don't think that the writing itself was poor. The action scenes were definitely very interesting, and there are aspects of the politics that were very entertaining, because Roper, while taking on this new role, finds himself having to compete with this other very well-known soldier to maintain rule, because this person wants to take over. They're very power hungry, and they have these moments where they're manipulating and scheming, and I actually really enjoyed those parts of the book. But pretty quickly these two characters are separated, and I was like, dang it, because I liked when they were more with each other. And then there's a chunk where they are kind of going head to head, but once again I feel like things were a little too easy. And I actually think that this book could have just been split into multiple books. I believe there is a sequel, but I mean that this story alone, I actually would have liked more time with these individual sections. Anyway, I'm sorry for this basically being a book review of this one book, but I do think so many other people would like it. If you like military fantasy, if you like a lot of action, and if you like the scheming and the manipulating, then definitely check this book out. I highly recommend it if you think any of that sounds good. Next up, we have another book with the word wolf in the title, and that would be For the Wolf. This was a story that I thought was going to be a Little Red Riding Hood retelling, but instead it turned out to be more a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And as you would expect from that, it does end up having a romantic element to it. I do think, though, that if you're somebody who doesn't want the romance to overtake the story, you just want it to be there and you don't mind the romance, but you also want there to be more plot to do with the fantasy elements, I think you actually would probably enjoy this. It's kind of a blend of both, and it's quite atmospheric. It was, I believe, compared to Uprooted and The Bear and the Nightingale in its marketing, and while the plot is similar to Uprooted, the writing style is not similar to either of those two books. It's atmospheric like those two. If you're a seasonal mood reader, I would say this is a great one to pick up for fall and or winter. But aside from it being atmospheric and surface level, a girl having to basically be sacrificed to this being that's sort of protecting the kingdom, that plot line sounds very similar to Uprooted, but otherwise I wouldn't say it's necessarily like those two books. It is much more direct in its writing style. I would say there's not as much character to the narration. All that said, I had a good time with this. It leans a little bit young for adult fantasy, but there are some more mature aspects to the story. But if you're somebody who maybe you don't necessarily like super epic fantasy, this one I would say is great, especially if you like fairy tale inspired stories. And also for those of you who like creepy forest settings, this is the book for you. That's a big part of what the plot is. It is the first book in a series. I am going to want to pick up the second one when it eventually comes out. And I just want to add really quick, because I did see that some people were wondering if there is a werewolf aspect to the story, because it's called For the Wolf, and she's supposed to be sacrificed to a wolf. And no, there is not a werewolf. Switching gears, we have the nonfiction book Know My Name by Chanel Miller. I wasn't sure which nonfiction from my July TBR I was going to pick up, and this is the one I went with. So many of you told me that this is one of the most powerful books you've ever read, that it's absolutely fantastic, and I 100% agree. It is an autobiographical memoir from Chanel Miller, who is a sexual assault survivor who is telling her story about what happened, and it is one of the most heartbreaking, difficult things to read. But also, I watched this interview between her and Trevor Noah, and he described her story, despite it being difficult, as also very triumphant, and I think that's the perfect way to describe it. So often, especially in fantasy books, we see these things that often affect women. They don't just affect women, they affect men and women. But in this particular story, a lot of what happens to her is something that more often happens to women. And in fantasy books, which I love to read, we often see the pain of the sorts of things that this book talks about, but we don't see that triumph. We don't see the way that pain turns into something else, or we don't see the healing that's involved. This is just a book I feel like everybody should read, basically. It's absolutely amazing, and it is so frustrating because she details how there would be instances when she was remaining anonymous that she would look up basically people's reactions to the court case, because it was something that was talked about in the media all the time. And the way that people talked about her and the way that people would try to frame everything as this was her fault because she was at a party, this was her fault because she was drinking at a party where everybody was drinking and she must have, this is all her fault. And the way that terrible things that people would say about her, it's horrific. One of the most powerful things I've ever picked up. And if you're a crier, get ready. I almost cried so many times. Like, if I started reading you some of the tabs, if I started reading them to you, I don't know if I could keep myself under control here. Next up, we have an adult sci-fi called The Book of Koli. This is a post-apocalyptic setting, and the way that it is sort of described in the synopsis and based off of the way the cover looks and everything, you get the impression that the forest and the trees are going to play a much bigger role. And what I mean by that is it's very much sort of emphasized in the description that there are these trees that essentially harm people and sometimes eat people. And it's described early on how these trees are able to do this, how our world kind of got to this point. There's also a lot of technology that's sort of laying around, and anybody who has the ability to make this technology work is often who ends up being in a more elevated position within these very, very small communities because society has been broken apart into these small communities. And we follow this young man named Koli. I was so intrigued by this setting. I thought the idea of this society where there's remnants of technology and there's something beyond this community that you don't really know what's going on, but you just know there's something in the outside world. And it seems like some people are purposefully being left in the dark. And what's going on with these trees that basically eat people? And the tree aspect of it is really not, I would say, that significant a part of the book. It is more of a world-building detail. It's a very interesting story. There's also a big snarky AI aspect to the story, and if you love that in your books, absolutely check this out because this is one of the most interesting artificial intelligence I've seen in a story. But ultimately, Koli as a main character I found to be a little bit frustrating, and I thought that the plot, I know I've described a few different books in this wrap-up as being a little meandering at times, but this one was just a little bit too much for me. We sort of have two main plots in the story that aren't all that connected, and then the big thing that we're setting up for, I just wasn't interested in finding all that much out about it or following the journey. So it's not a series I'm going to continue, but if it sounds interesting to you, I would still definitely give it a go. The last two books I completed would be Six Crimson Cranes and then Wings of Shadow. Wings of Shadow is the final book in the Crown of Feathers series. I did really enjoy this story. It follows these Phoenix Riders who are trying to get themselves back into their homeland, essentially, and they're a rebellious group, but they're the good guys, and we follow our character who so desperately wants not only her own phoenix, but to join this group of rebellious Phoenix Riders. She has an older sister who has kind of been her mother figure for a while. Her older sister is the one that's taken care of her, but they have a very toxic relationship, and it's one of the most fascinating aspects of the trilogy. Overall, I quite liked it. I thought the third book here was a fantastic ending. The whole final chunk of the end was fantastic. It was kind of like the big boss battle. Six Crimson Cranes, I believe, is the first in a duology. I know for a fact it's the first in a series, but I believe it's just going to be 2 books. And it follows a girl who is royalty, and she's a little bit careless, does kind of what she wants. She sort of says whatever she wants, and she is very free-spirited, and she ends up having this curse put on her where nobody is allowed to really see her face. She has this, it sounds kind of a little different, but she has this giant bowl basically on her head and she can't take it off. And then her brothers, her 6 brothers, are turned into cranes. And if she speaks, one of her brothers will die for every word that she speaks. So she is trying to figure out how to break this curse, how to save her brothers, and how to rid the realm of what she believes is this demonic type of force. I was so shocked at the way that she was able to have so much voice in a character that really couldn't speak. There's also a little
other, almost like a Tinkerbell type thing that the main character can talk to, which I thought this little relationship was precious. It was so wholesome and cute, and it's definitely younger fantasy, but I loved the growth of the character. I thought it was really adorable. It's not an absolute new favorite. I didn't have my heart ripped apart and then put back together or anything like that, but it was cute. It was so cute. It's one of the books that I think about with my little nieces. If they were to come over and they would want to read one of my books, I'd be like, you should read this one. I just think it would be so cute. So I really enjoyed it. I liked it. I liked it quite a lot. As for the books I haven't yet completed, we have Half Sick of Shadows, The Jasmine Throne, and Hood. And then one other book that I hopefully can try to get around to. It wasn't on my TBR for August, but I kind of want to put it on my TBR for August, would be The Pariah by Anthony Ryan. So if I can get around to that, I will. Fingers crossed. But anyway, let me know how your July reading went. Did you read a lot of books? Not really. Did you read any of the books that I mentioned? But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.